There is a surprise, however, and it became apparent to me on this venerable September 17th date, which is why I am doing this paper. And that is that the home mortgage crisis has created a primary source of government revenue that technically has the potential of reducing in meaningful numbers the $9.7 trillion in national debt. The homeowner real estate taxes and mortgage interest deductions fostered an economic climate where it made sense to acquire large homes with, in this case, even larger mortgages. Greed on Wall Street in creating instruments to fund this homeowner demand times additional homeowner greed to utilize their artificially valued Lady in Homes equity lines to prematurely seize their part of the American dream was squared by none other than FAS 157, an overzealous reckoning in a collapsing real estate market. The result was a fire sale of losses by troubled financial institutions so monumental that only the richest country in the world, the United States of America, can print enough borrowed money to buy the failing companies. As I see it, last year's implementation of FAS 157, market-to-market accounting, has created enormous capital shortages by valuing the mortgage loan assets at absurdly low values despite the overwhelming majority of home mortgages performing, at least for now, as contracted with most American citizens. So, to put it in clear real estate terms, here in Clearwater, Florida, financial institutions own millions of dollars of home mortgages. With the new FAS 157 market-to-market accounting system, the inevitable burst of the housing bubble requires the financial institutions to determine the value of these mortgage assets against the current value of the homes. Homeowner equity, of course, has evaporated in this real estate market, and despite that most of the loans being paid and there is a strong positive cash flow, FAS 157 requires the financial institutions to infuse enormous amounts of cash to meet the new market-to-market, that is, current market prices of home value ratios. This, of course, is not just happening in Clearwater, but all throughout the United States, and financial giants such as AIG are being forced to come up with enormous amounts of capital to meet FAS 157 accounting procedures despite positive cash flow on a majority of their holdings. The cash just isn't there for AIG and a host of other financial institutions. The result is they are forced to sell performing assets, such as AIG's airline leasing business, virtually overnight to remain solvent, which is an impossibility. So instead of repealing the poorly timed FAS 157 market-to-market accounting system, giving time for the federal government to ferret out the facts behind the mortgage-backed securities collapse, as not even the CEOs are sure what their traders acquired in these troubled equities, and the real estate markets need the time to stabilize, the Fed is all but forced to step in and purchase AIG for nearly 10 cents on the dollar with its trillion-plus asset base just after acquiring Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So why in this time of great crisis wouldn't the Wall Street Journal reflect on the Constitution of 1787, its times, and the post-war debt parallels of the two economies and ask, what would George and Alexander do in 2008? Historic amnesia seems to be the ailment of the free press, as well as the United States Congress and the United States President. September 17, 2008 is truly a Black Wednesday. It is a day that irrevocably changed America. So George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, move over, as you've met your match with George W. Bush, Robert Paulson, and Christopher Cox. The national debt is about to be paid, courtesy of Wall Street, as the federal government is the only real buyer for the trillions and trillions and trillions at-risk mortgage equities, even at a dime on the dollar prices. It is a bargain. The president has already put down a payment on it, AIG, Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae, and Congress is surely to secure loan after loan after loan with the only real collateral they have, the American taxpayers' children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The question is, will the federal government that has already saddled our children with $9.7 trillion in debt, health care programs that are reaching 25% of GDP, Even before the baby boomers reach their golden years, can they possibly competently manage trillions of dollars in home mortgage equities? What about the commercial mortgages? Will they acquire them too? What about all the other assets these companies hold? Are they going to manage those properly? If so, the People's Republic of the United States is only about a half score away, unless, well, do I dare be the first to say it? I hereby nominate Warren Buffett as President of the United States to restore fiscally sound, federally regulated, and thereby ethical capitalism to the United States of America. I am sorry to report that the state laws have also changed, and many legislators will not even permit a write-in campaign for the United States President. So it's too late for Warren Buffett in 2008. I ask again, what would George Washington and Alexander Hamilton do now that Wall Street has moved to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? More importantly, what will John McCain or Barack Obama do? This, more so than any other issue, needs to be answered before Election Day in November 2008. So here we are on September 21st, 220 years later, after the great Constitution was passed. And who is going to be our Alexander Hamilton? Will Secretary Paulson arise to the challenge? I say repeal FAS 157 and work with federal regulators to give these financial institutions some time to ferret out just how bad this equity crisis is in their portfolios. Once done, we will know the numbers and know what tax dollars we need to commit to what type of programs to save the collapse of the world economy. This is just plain old stand close. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a footnote to Alexander Hamilton. After the failure of the Constitution of 1777's Confederation, in 1789 a new government was formed by President George Washington, and he appointed Alexander Hamilton as his Secretary of the Treasury. Secretary Hamilton inherited a bankrupt nation. In 1790, he published his reports on public credit, a plan for the federal government to assume domestic and foreign debt, pay off federal war bonds, and create a national mechanism for collecting taxes. Republicans, and it's not the same Republican Party in 1790 as it is today, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson vehemently opposed Hamilton's plan. The Virginians saw it as unfair for their state to assume the debt of the other states, and opposition arose from other fiscally sound states as well. To break the deadlock, Hamilton negotiated a land and debt agreement with Jefferson. Simply, he decided to throw his support behind a Republican proposal to move the nation's capital from New York to Maryland and Virginia along the Potomac River if Thomas Jefferson and Madison supported his plan for retiring the public debt. Hamilton, in these negotiations, also sought to secure the establishment of a federal bank and mint. Against very long odds, he brokered the agreement and placed the United States, with the help of Jefferson, Madison, and Washington, on fiscally solid ground, with the capital in Washington, D.C. The federal government debt was converted into interest-bearing bonds, which would mature after a period of time. A sinking fund of revenue from the post office was earmarked for the payment of principal of the debt. Hamilton's plan contained simply three basic provisions. As mandated by the 1787 Constitution, the foreign debt and interest would be paid in full according to the terms initially agreed on. Second, the principal of domestic debt would be paid at a 4% interest on long-term and 6% on short-term bonds to the current bearers. And finally, state debts would be assumed by the federal government with interest payments deferred until 1792.